Well, good morning. We're starting a brand new series today from Connexus Church in Canada, and it's called Doing Time. And we're doing it in a season where a lot of us are thinking about the new year. And last week, Luke did an excellent job of telling us to be weird in 2018. And the reality is we just want to live differently for Christ this year. And so if you missed that, I encourage you to go to our website, go to the Faith Mountain app, and watch Luke's message. It'll be well worth your time. So we're now 7 days into the new year, and some of us have already had to restart our resolutions. And so now it's been 11 minutes since you last had a donut. And it's just where you're at. Some of you are at the gym irritating all the people who were there in November, but now can't get a machine. And you're saying, this year is going to be different. This is a brand new year, and that's what all of us want. And we're in the infancy of a brand new year, and a lot of you are saying, there's a lot about this year that feels the same as last year. But isn't that the reality with a new year? The reality is this, that you still bring you into everything that you do. The same you that was in last year has jumped into 2018, and there are a lot of things that are not different, are not new this year. For example, you probably do not have a new job. You don't have a new family. You don't have new kids. You probably don't have a new house or a new car. It's the same that we had last year. So we want to be new, but nothing really feels new. And sometimes if you've done this for a little while, if you've been on a few rotations around the sun, eventually your life can feel like you're stuck. And while you're doing the same thing over and over again, you feel as though you're just doing time. And hence the reason behind this series. So we're going to spend the next 6 weeks battling against this feeling that we're doing time. The question that we're going to wrestle with is a question that I think a lot of us ask, and it's this: is this as good as it gets? You know, for some of you, you're looking at your family, you're looking at your significant relationship, you're looking at your spouse or your kids or your job, and you're wondering, is this as good as it gets? Maybe the honeymoon is over for you. Maybe it's been over for a long time. Or maybe you're engaged. And when you first started dating, things were exciting. You know, there were sparks flying. It was fun. And now that you're engaged, things aren't as exciting. Things aren't as fun. And you're wondering, is this as good as it gets? Or you're parenting, and the thrill of having a newborn is worn off. And now you're into the reality of the toddler years or the teenage years, and you're saying, really? Is this as good as it gets? Some of you have been promoted. In fact, you've had a really good year. And it's not like you're doing time at some dead-end job. No, you have the corner office, you have the position, the title, the income. But it hasn't been as fulfilling as you thought it would. And you find yourself asking the question, is this as good as it gets? And if we aren't careful, we fall into a pattern where all of our life we're just kind of doing time. We're just putting in time until basically we can check out of this life or check out of this job. Or we're hoping that someday it'll magically get better in my family. Or some breakthrough will happen with my kids. Or I'll finally have that spiritual breakthrough. Some of you don't just feel this way about your life. It's how you feel about your relationship with God. You're asking, is this as good as it gets? I mean, you're here today. You're at church. You're like, I'm here, I'm trying, I'm listening, and yet you're wondering, is there something more? Is there more to life? Is there more to my relationship with God? More spiritually? Or am I just going to end up doing time? So I want to start this 6-week conversation with a question. The question is, how engaged are you? You know, if you were to look at your engagement level for this new year, how engaged are you? How engaged are you at work? How engaged are you at home in your significant relationship with your spouse? How engaged are you with your kids in your parenting? How engaged are you spiritually? Would you really say that you're engaged? The reality is that for most of us, if we were honest, we would say, no, we're not. And according to a Gallup 2017, so long ago, so last year, 2017 State of the Global Workplace Survey, 85% of employees self-identified that they are either not engaged or actively disengaged at work. The other 15% were on Facebook during the meeting and they missed it. So 15% say they're engaged at work, but that's a small minority. And if you look around for a moment, go ahead, look at your neighbors, look around. 85% of us in this room would say that we are probably not engaged at work. In fact, it's Sunday, and some of you are dreading tomorrow because you always dread Monday. And it's easy to blame your lame boss or your dead-end job. You can blame your measly salary, your bad benefits, or your bad work conditions. I mean, some of you are doing this and you're self-employed. That's a problem. You can blame it on other people. You can blame it on your circumstances, but the reality is that you're just doing time at work. You know, I remember as a teenager, I worked in a real estate office with my mom, and every once in a while, the lottery would get to like this ridiculous dollar amount, and so everybody would pitch in, and everybody would give $1, give $5, whatever, and they'd buy all these lottery tickets, and they'd photocopy them, and you have this packet of all the tickets, right? Have you ever done that? Have you ever been part of like the office lottery pool or the Powerball pool? And I didn't think a whole lot of it then, but in hindsight, I realized how many of them saw this as their ticket out. You know, they would even say things like, if we win this, you will never see me here again. And at the time, it just seemed like a natural comment, right? I didn't even realize it, but in hindsight, now I recognize that they were doing time in a job that for one reason or another, they clearly hated. 85% of you are statistically disengaged. And you have reasons, like the boss, or your shift supervisor, or maybe you used to like it, but you got transferred, or you should have been promoted, but you got passed over. You have reasons for your disengagement, but you're disengaged. How engaged are you? How engaged are you at work? Really? Honestly? You know, if no one were looking, no one's paying attention, how engaged are you? How engaged are you at home? In your significant relationship, you're dating, you're engaged, you're married, whatever it is, the reality is that too many spouses are disengaged. You're married, but you're really just doing time. And you ask yourself, maybe not in these words, but you ask the question, is this as good as it gets? Are we just going to be this middle-class family where I go to my work and you go to your work and we drop the kids off for soccer or football, or maybe in the summer it's baseball? Every year we take a vacation But you're left to wonder, is this as good as it gets? There are a lot of spouses that are disengaged. You're not divorced. You're not going to get divorced. You're just disengaged, and the passion is gone. The romance is gone. Too many spouses are disengaged, but parents are disengaged too. I mean, it's hard being a parent. You have this euphoria as you find out you're going to be a parent. And that feeling is met by this cute little baby who never sleeps and needs all your attention. And then over time, your euphoria is exchanged for exhaustion. And then they become toddlers, and you realize where the phrase terrible twos came from. And this is way before they haven't even hit 3. And if you ask me, 3 is way harder than 2. Why is no one talking about 3? 3 is crazy hard. We should call it the tumultuous 3s, or I don't know. 3s, tough. Sorry if your kids too. Then they become preteens or teenagers, and that's a whole different world. And some of you are like, well, I was engaged, but I'm not anymore, despite the fact that you grew up like that. You know, some of you had a dad who would come home from work, but he wasn't really home. And while there was no iPhone or iPad to distract him, he would just go into his garage and tinker around or turn the TV on and just kind of disengage from everything. Or maybe your dad drank. And you might say, yeah, that's my father, but I don't really have a relationship with him. Or maybe your mom was disengaged. You know, she was always busy, always stressed. Maybe she was depressed or angry. And you told yourself that you would never be that parent. But now you're at this point where you have your own kids. And this weird thing happened for those of you that are parenting older children. As they got older, somewhere between 11 and 15, they start to withdraw. And you remember when they were 3 years old and they would just cling to your leg and never let go. And now a decade later, they're saying, can you take me to the mall? But can you drop me off away from the entrance? Because I don't want to be seen with you. They're withdrawing. And this happens inevitably. Do you know that this is actually part of God's design for your family? Not that your kids would dysfunctionally withdraw, but the fact that they're on a journey towards independence. That it starts in the early teen years, and it's this God-given impulse that they need to start getting ready to do things on their own. And it makes sense, right? Unless you want kids that are playing video games in your basement at age 39, which happens, but it's not the plan, right? We went through a series recently called Offensive Parenting, and we focused on this idea that as parents, it's our goal to prepare our kids for life rather than to protect them from it. And we want them to be men and women who live their lives to honor God, and they're ready to live life when they move out of our homes. And the number one mistake that parents of teens make with their kids when they withdraw is that as parents, you withdraw as well. And they say, I don't know how to have a conversation with my son. Or I have no idea how to talk to my teenage daughter. And so you just disengage your heart as a parent. You need to fight for your relationship with your teenager. You need to work at it so that you don't disengage. And there are a lot of parents who are disengaged. And then we wonder why our kids are disengaged. But they learned it from us, right? They learned how to be disengaged. And as a result, we wind up with mediocre jobs, mediocre families, and mediocre lives. And maybe as we open up a new chapter, as we look at a brand new year, Maybe you would evaluate your life and you would say that it's mediocre. You would say, my life isn't terrible, but it isn't terrific. It's just mediocre. It's just fine. Yeah, I have an okay job. I have an okay family. I have an okay life. And you're asking yourself, is this as good as it gets? And if that's you, what do you do? Well, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to walk through 6 ways that you can battle this feeling that you're doing time. That we can battle doing time in our jobs. We can battle doing time in our homes and doing time spiritually. So we're going to look at 6 phrases that could help you see your world, your job, your family, and even your spiritual life differently. So that a year from now, you would answer the question, am I just doing time differently? Because I don't think you should be doing time. I don't think you should be doing time at work. I don't think you should be doing time at home. I don't think you should be doing time in your relationships. And I certainly don't think you should be doing time spiritually. I believe there's a better way to live. And so the first of these 6 phrases that we're going to walk through is simply this. It's battle mediocrity. See, what we want to do in our lives is we want to identify the places where it's mediocre and battle it. Whenever we see something that should be better or could be better, we're going to try to make it better. We have an incredible God who created this life to be meaningful. A God who promises that life would be the antithesis of mediocre. He promises it to be full. And the only way that we can experience this fullness is to passionately pursue your purpose in finding and following Him. And if you think about your workplace, or you think about your home, wouldn't it be incredible if it was a place where you never tolerated mediocrity? Where you just learned to engage and battle mediocrity, where you're pursuing excellence. And so each of these phrases that we're going to walk through are joined with a question. And this week's question is this: am I allowing what is good to stand in the way of what is great? Are you allowing what's merely good? Because I have a good job. I have a good marriage. I have a good family. Are you allowing that to keep you from something great? What if God had something great in store for you? What if your work could be great? What if your marriage, as stale as it is today, what if it could be truly fantastic? What if your family, and you might have that family where on the outside looking in, and people just say, oh, you have a great family. But as you sit there and think about it, you just go, is it really that great? What if it could be truly great? What if you fully realized the potential of what God has placed in your life? And it might not mean being famous, but it might mean being famous in your world. It might mean that you're engaging at a higher level than ever before. And so here's the key. Here's what you need to realize as you battle mediocrity, that nothing ever stays mediocre if your heart is fully engaged. Nothing ever stays mediocre if you just fully engage your heart in it. If you think about it, if 85% of people are disengaged at work, if most of us are disengaged at home, if you've disengaged from your marriage or from your children, if you've disengaged from your friends or from your relationship with God, the natural trajectory is that it gets mediocre. What if you were to engage your heart? What if you were to say, I'm going to pour my heart fully into my work? I'm going to pour my heart into my marriage, into my significant relationship. What if you were to just pour your heart into your children, into your parenting? Or you were to pour your heart into work or your relationship with God? What if you did that? Things would stop being mediocre. If you have a mediocre, average life, the antidote is to fully engage your heart. And so today, I want to take a look at work, because I think it's something that most of us can relate to. You know, we all have different family dynamics, we all have different relationship dynamics, but most of us work on some level. You might be a student, but for you, school is work. You might be a stay-at-home parent, but let's face it, you are working. You might be retired, but if you're honest and you evaluate your life, aren't there parts of it that look a lot like work? And today is Sunday, and I know that some of you are dreading tomorrow because it's Monday, and you have always dreaded Monday. You have to deal with that bad boss or that bad workplace, or maybe you've just had a nice long winter break, and tomorrow's the first day back at school. But that's been your story for years. You haven't liked it for years. It's a drudgery. And maybe if I had a better job, or maybe if I got paid more, maybe if I had better coworkers, or if I had a new supervisor, whatever it is, we always have reasons about how things could be better, and you're frustrated with your current conditions. Well, believe it or not, the Bible actually speaks directly to this. And so we're going to jump back 2,000 years in time. We're going to look at a situation that Paul addressed. And if you know anything about history, you probably know that slavery was normal. It wasn't good, but it was normal during Jesus' time. And as you can imagine, as people became Christ followers, they were in some way affected by this. Some of them may have been slave owners, and others may have been slaves themselves. And so Paul's writing to the church in Ephesus, and we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 6, if you want to turn there. And he's actually addressing slaves. And it's important for us to realize that as Paul's writing this, he isn't making a value judgment on slavery. Is it good or bad? He isn't talking about the practice of slavery itself. What he's doing here is he's acknowledging the reality that it is and helping people deal with how to live in that current reality. And so he's speaking directly to slaves. And in Ephesians 6, verse 5, he says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear." He doesn't say, "Slaves, throw off your chains. You're right to be upset about your condition. You have every right to be mad because your life stinks." No, he says, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. Serve them sincerely as you would serve Christ. Serve them sincerely? Like, you have no idea who my boss is. You don't understand the conditions that I have to work under. I mean, slavery in the first century was a terrible institution. And here's what Paul has to say to slaves. He says, I want you to throw your heart into it. I want you to serve your master as if you're serving Jesus. And I know you don't get paid anything. I know that you are mistreated and the conditions are terrible, but I want you to serve. I want you to love. He says, try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. I mean, he kind of calls us out. You know, we've all done that. Like, oh, look busy, the boss is coming. And he says, no. Try to please them all of the time, not just when they're watching you. Do you know what character is? It's who you are when no one is looking. Character is who you are when no one is looking. So when the cameras aren't on, you know, when social media isn't paying attention, when there's not a good selfie opportunity, when your supervisor's not there or your boss is on vacation, that'll tell you who you really are. And he says, I want you to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. As slaves of Christ, do the will of God with all your heart. One of the questions that I get a lot as a pastor is, what is God's will for my life? Do you know what God's will for your life at work is? It isn't this mysterious thing that he'll someday reveal to you. It isn't this thing that a burning bush will occur and you'll all of a sudden know. No, he's revealed it in his word, and it's to throw your heart into it. God's will for your life is to throw your heart into your current job. As much as you hate it, as much as you don't like your boss or the conditions are terrible, as much as you don't like anything about it, God is calling you to fully engage, to throw your heart into it. Because God's given you a new reality. So here's the why. If you're a Christ follower, you have a unique purpose and a unique opportunity for living this way. A unique reason for throwing your heart into your work and fully engaging. And it's this. In the first century, this is what the church did. These people who found Jesus and began following him started to throw their heart into their workplace, throw their heart into their families, into their homes. And what happened is that Christians quickly became known as some of the most reliable people that you could hire. We don't always have that reputation in the current economy. But what would happen if you were to show up for work tomorrow and decide to fully engage your heart? It says, work with enthusiasm, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will reward each one of us for the good we do, whether we are slaves or free. God will reward you. Doesn't matter if you're slave or free. Doesn't matter if you feel like a slave in your job or if you're the boss. When we work with enthusiasm, we will be rewarded. When we throw our hearts into our work, God rewards us. But it's so hard. And it's so challenging. 85% of us are not engaged. So I have a real sensitivity to this. Maybe it's because I worked in the customer service industry for a number of years, or maybe I'm just wired this way. I'm really not sure. But I can't tell you how many times I'll walk out of a store or a restaurant or some type of establishment, and I'll look to Lauren and I'll just say, wow, that person loves their job. And the sarcasm's just dripping, from that statement. And I don't know what it is. It's different every time. Sometimes it's their body language. Sometimes it's the things that they say or the tone of voice that they use. Sometimes it's their sense of urgency or lack thereof. But it's totally obvious to me that this person is not engaged in their work. And if I came to your work, would I see someone who's fully engaged, someone who loves their job, or would I see someone who really loves their job? And he continues saying, masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Don't threaten them. Remember, you both have the same master in heaven, and he has no favorites. You never play the power trip as the boss. And this passage has caused me to change my perspective over the last several years. And while I may be a boss, I don't want to think of myself in that term. I don't want to think of people working for me, but I want to think about how I can work for them. How do I work for people? How do I, as a boss, serve and love the people I work with? Because God has no favorites. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. Nothing stays mediocre when your heart is fully engaged. And what I've learned throughout the years is that fulfillment doesn't come from what I get out of work, but from what I put into it. And so many of us are thinking about, what can I get out of work? Really, for us, work is just a means to an end. And we're thinking about, how can I get a raise? Or I can't wait until I retire and get that pension, which is a rare thing. Good for you. I can't wait until Friday. Or I expected my boss to do this and he let me down. Or I expect my coworkers to do these things for me. And everything is focused on what you want to get out of your job. And that's why you're so chronically dissatisfied. You know, one of the hardest workers I've ever known was my grandfather. So he worked a lot of manual labor jobs over the course of his life. And I remember as I was growing up, he was a plumber's helper. And so he was, working under sinks. He's working in crawl spaces, under houses. We didn't have basements in California. It's just this little tiny space that high that you got to crawl around in. And he's doing this into his 70s. And he probably wasn't making much more than minimum wage. But not once did I ever hear him complain. I mean, he's 70 years old. He's working under people's houses, and he's fully engaged. Fulfillment doesn't come from what you get out of work, but what you put into it. And those that give the most tend to receive the most. When you give your heart, you tend to get more in exchange. It's kind of like what Jesus said when he said, if you seek to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you give it away for my sake, you will find it. And that's why we place such value on sacrifice here at Faith Mountain. It's because we know the emptiness that comes from holding on to your life so tightly. But on the flip side, we've experienced how incredible it can be to give your life away, and in doing so, find it. And that's what we want you to experience. We want you to experience that degree of fulfillment. It's what I want you to know what it's like to find your life in giving it away. And that's why one of our staff values is to make it better. You may not even know we have staff values, but we do. And one of them is to make it better. And it really coincides with what we're doing today in talking about battling mediocrity. We want everything that we do here to be the best that it can, and we're willing to sacrifice to make that happen. And we also have incredible volunteers that come here each and every week to serve you. They sacrifice so that you and your kids might find and follow Jesus. They're giving their life away, and it's so fulfilling. And they want that for you too. These volunteers are actually battling mediocrity. Our staff is battling mediocrity because we truly believe that when you give the most, you get the most in return. And it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense, but it is absolutely true. And so as we leave this place today, as we continue into 2018, what should you do? What do we do? And I want to challenge you that wherever your life is feeling mediocre, it might be at work, or maybe things at home are just really blah. Maybe it's your spouse and your relationship there, or your kids. Maybe it's your relationship with God. That thing in your life that just feels mediocre. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to engage your heart fully. We'll deal with this a little later in the series, but I know that some of you are terrified right now because you've pulled your heart back. You've pulled your heart back because it got hurt. You pulled your heart back because it got broken. And you're thinking, if I throw my heart into my marriage, what if it doesn't work out? If I throw my heart into my kids, what if they reject me? What if they don't want anything to do with me? You want me to engage at my job? Do you know how bad my job sucks? We just talked about slavery. And I doubt it's as bad as that. Engage your heart fully. And some of you right now, you're thinking, I can't. I can't do it. And you're probably right. That's why you need Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the one who heals our hearts. He's the one who tells us it's okay to trust again. It's okay to believe again. It's okay to have hope again because I am with you. And God always does his best work with fully engaged hearts. He does his very finest work with hearts that are fully engaged. And maybe you've been holding your heart back from God. Maybe you're afraid to go deeper because you're afraid that he's going to speak into some parts of your life that you really don't want him to speak into. Or maybe you're just waiting for your spouse to walk away because you are not going to be the one to re-engage your marriage because you've been hurt too much. Maybe your kids have said things or done things that just hurt so deeply, and you want to keep your heart pulled back. What are you going to do? You're going to engage your heart fully because God does his best work with fully engaged hearts, and nothing stays mediocre when your heart is fully engaged. Yes, it's scary, but you're tired of mediocre. And yes, you're going to need help, but your help comes from the Lord. And whatever it is, that thing that you're facing, throw your heart into it. And if it engages your fears, that's okay. God knows, and he will help you. It'll be so worth it because nothing stays mediocre when you throw your heart into it. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we acknowledge this morning our frailty as humans. We come before you just honestly saying, it's hard to fully engage. It's hard to throw my heart into something when I've been hurt, when I'm facing fear. God, I just ask this morning, would you help us? Would you give us the strength to throw our hearts into our lives, to fully engage in everything that we do? We can't do it on our own. I can't do it on my own, but you have promised us a helper. You have promised us your Holy Spirit to reside within us, to be our guide, to lead us. And so, God, I just pray that your Spirit would fill our being and that it would eliminate fear, that it would eliminate doubt, and instead it would fill us with hope, fill us with joy, fill us with purpose as we engage in this brand new year. God, we entrust our lives to you. Would you help us to throw our hearts into it? We love you. Amen.